The moment my son-in-law's lawyer said my name in that courtroom, I watched his face go completely still. Not the way people freeze when they're surprised. The way they freeze when they realize they've made a terrible, irreversible mistake. My daughter didn't see it. She was too busy staring at her phone under the table the way she always did when she thought no one important was watching. But I saw it, and so did Judge Harmon. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to where this really started. Not the courtroom, not the filing of papers, but the Tuesday morning my son-in-law stood in my kitchen and told me I was a burden. He didn't use that word, of course. Men like him never do. He said things like practical and quality of life, and we just want what's best for you. He had a brochure on the counter before I'd even finished my coffee. Sycamore Ridge Senior Living. Color photos of smiling white-haired people playing cards and doing watercolor painting. He'd circled the monthly rate in pencil, $200, like he was being transparent about something, like he was doing me a favor. My daughter stood by the window with her arms crossed, not quite looking at me. She'd always done that since she was 12 years old. Whenever something uncomfortable was happening that she'd agreed to, she'd find a spot just slightly to the left of the situation and stare at it. I was 67 years old. I had lived in that house for 31 years. I had raised her in every room of it. Her father, my husband George, had died there 3 years before, in the bedroom we'd shared since 1989, and now his son-in-law was sliding a brochure across the kitchen table, like I was a problem to be filed away. The house is just too much for one person, my son-in-law said. His name was Derek, and he had the particular confidence of a man who had never once been wrong in his own mind. Maintenance alone, and you can't be shoveling snow at your age. It's a liability. I'd picked up the brochure, I looked at the watercolor photo, I set it back down. I'll think about it, I said. What I was actually thinking was, George, what did you do? My husband had been a quiet man. That's the thing people said at his funeral, over and over, like it was the defining fact of him. George was just so quiet. They meant it kindly. He'd been an accountant for 38 years at a small firm in Dayton, Ohio. He drove a sensible car. He wore the same style of khaki pants from 1994 until the day he died. He made the same pot of decaf at 7 a.m. every morning and read the newspaper front to back before he said a single word. What people didn't know about George was that underneath all that quiet, he was watching everything. He noticed things, he remembered things, and he planned for things that hadn't happened yet. 3 weeks after Derek laid that brochure on my table, I got a phone call from a woman named Olivia at a law firm I had never heard of, asking if I could come in at my earliest convenience to discuss matters pertaining to the estate of George Harold Whitfield. I assumed it was a loose end. Some small account, maybe a life insurance policy I'd forgotten about. George had handled all of that. I'd trusted him completely and therefore paid almost no attention. What I found in that conference room on the grey Thursday morning changed everything I thought I understood about the 39 years I had spent as that man's wife. Olivia was younger than I expected. Late 30s, dark blazer, the kind of calm that comes from delivering surprising news on a regular basis. She had a thick file folder on the table and a second one stacked beneath it. Mrs. Whitfield, she said, your husband retained this firm in 2009. He updated his instructions several times over the years, most recently in 2021, about 18 months before his passing. I folded my hands in my lap. I didn't know he had an attorney. That was intentional on his part, she said. She said it gently, without judgment. He was very specific about what he wanted you to know and when. For the next hour, she walked me through it. George had started quietly buying property in 1997, a small rental house on the east side of Dayton, bought under an LLC he'd formed with the help of a colleague. He told me it was a minor investment, which was technically true at the time, and I hadn't asked questions. Over the following decade, he'd added 4 more single-family homes, then a small commercial strip in a suburb that had since tripled in value. He put everything in a trust structured so carefully that it existed entirely separately from our household finances. My daughter's name was not in it. Derek's name was certainly not in it. Mine was the only name in it. Current estimated value of the trust assets, Olivia said, sliding a single page across the table, is approximately $2.3 million. I stared at that number for a long time. He never said a word, I finally said. He told us, Olivia said carefully, that he wanted you to have security that no one could take from you. His exact words from a letter he left with us were, She opened the folder and found a handwritten page I recognized immediately as George's narrow, careful printing. She read it aloud. If you're reading this, something has happened and I'm not there to look after things myself. I need you to know I wasn't keeping secrets to be dishonest. I was keeping them to keep you safe. You always trusted everyone too easily, and I loved that about you, and it scared me every single day. I had to stop her there. I needed a moment. Derek filed the lawsuit 4 months after I declined to sell the house. He was sophisticated about it, I'll give him that. He didn't come at me directly. He went through my daughter, convincing her that she was owed a portion of the marital estate as my primary caregiver, a term that was generous considering her contributions had consisted mainly of forwarding me articles about fall prevention and showing up the 3 Christmases out of the last 5. The legal theory was complicated and, according to Olivia, fairly creative in a desperate sort of way. Essentially, Derek had gotten into serious financial trouble, a failed restaurant venture, credit card debt I hadn't known about, a second mortgage on their house he hadn't mentioned to my daughter either, and he'd decided that the fastest solution was my house, which he estimated he could sell for roughly $450,000. He had no idea about the trust. I knew this because Olivia had advised me not to disclose it, and I had followed that advice with a discipline that surprised even me. For 4 months, I watched Derek make assumptions. I watched him explain to my daughter why this was necessary. I watched him draft demand letters and file paperwork and sit across from me at Thanksgiving dinner, cutting his turkey with the comfortable ease of a man who believed he had already won. I said very little. I had learned from George that the most powerful thing you could do in a room was stay quiet and let people show you who they were. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in March. Derek's attorney had filed a motion arguing that I lacked the capacity to manage my own affairs, a claim built almost entirely on the fact that I had declined to respond to his letters, which he apparently interpreted as confusion rather than strategy. I wore the grey suit I'd bought for George's retirement dinner in 2017. It still fit. My hair was done. I was, by anyone's measure, the least remarkable person in that courtroom, a 67-year-old woman from Dayton in a grey suit carrying a folder Olivia had prepared, sitting quietly in the second row. Derek's attorney was making an opening argument, something about diminished capacity and caregiver rights and the complexity of estate management for an elderly single woman. I watched the judge. His name was Judge Harmon, mid-50s, black robe, reading glasses on the end of his nose. He was looking at his papers. He was doing what judges do, which is mostly read while other people talk. Then Olivia stood up and said my name. Not just my name, my full name, including my professional designation, which I hadn't used in 17 years. Judge Harmon looked up, and I watched his face go completely still. What Olivia said next was this, that I was not an elderly woman of uncertain capacity, that I had in fact spent 22 years as a licensed financial examiner with the Ohio Department of Commerce, retiring in 2007 after overseeing regulatory compliance for some of the largest bank mergers in the state's history, that I held 2 advanced degrees, including a master's in public administration from Ohio State, that I had, for the past 4 months, been fully advised by legal counsel and had made every decision with complete comprehension and deliberate intent. She then introduced into evidence the trust documents George had established, the properties, the LLCs, the current valuation. Derek's attorney stopped mid-sentence. My daughter turned and looked at me. I don't know exactly what she was looking for. I kept my eyes forward. Judge Harmon took his glasses off. He set them on the bench. He looked at me for a moment that lasted longer than any moment in that room had a right to. Mrs. Whitfield, he said slowly, I believe we've met before. We had. 19 years ago, he had been a junior attorney at a firm that had come under regulatory review during a merger I was overseeing. I had been the one who'd cleared them. He had never forgotten it. He told me so once, years later at a conference in Columbus. I hadn't expected to see him here, on this bench, on this particular Tuesday in March. The room was very quiet. The motion was denied, every element of it. Judge Harmon was measured and professional, but his language was precise in a way that left no ambiguity about what he thought of the claim. He noted that the petitioner had presented no credible evidence of diminished capacity. He noted that the respondent, me, had in fact demonstrated an unusually sophisticated understanding of her legal and financial position. He noted that the filing appeared to have been motivated less by genuine concern for my welfare and more by a desire to access assets that were not, and had never been, available to the petitioner. That last part was for Derek's benefit. I could tell because Derek's jaw went tight in a way my daughter didn't seem to notice. Afterward, in the hallway, Derek tried to talk to me. He started with an apology that wasn't really an apology, the kind that begins with, "I'm sorry you feel that way," and I let him finish it before I said anything. "Derek," I said, "I've reviewed the financials on your restaurant. I've known about the second mortgage since November. I also know about the credit accounts." I watched his face. "I'm not going to say any of that in front of my daughter unless I have to, but I need you to understand something. I'm not confused. I have never been confused, and I will not be confused going forward." He didn't say anything after that. My daughter found me in the parking lot. She'd been crying, which I hadn't expected. Her mascara was slightly smudged, and she kept pushing her hair back behind her ear the way she'd done since she was 8 years old, when she was nervous about something. "Mum," she said, "I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. "About any of it. About Dad, about your career, about any of it." That was partly my fault, I knew. George and I had been private people. We hadn't talked about money with her the way maybe we should have. We'd wanted her to build her own life without feeling like she was waiting on something. That was reasonable. It was also, I could see now, a gap Derek had been able to walk right through. "Your father loved you," I said. "He set things up the way he did to protect me, not to keep anything from you." She nodded. She looked like she might say something, but instead she just stood there in the parking lot with her arms wrapped around herself, which was somehow worse than anything she could have said. I put my arm around her. She leaned into me the way she used to when she was small, before she decided I wasn't necessary, before Derek, before the brochure on the kitchen table. "Come have lunch with me," I said. "Just us." She nodded again. We went to a diner 3 blocks from the courthouse. We ordered coffee and eggs, and we sat in a booth by the window for 2 hours and talked in a way we hadn't talked in years. About her father, about her marriage, which she admitted was more complicated than I'd known, about what she wanted her life to look like. I didn't tell her what to do. I'm her mother, not her warden. But I told her she had options, and I told her that whatever she decided, she wasn't going to face it without someone in her corner. In the months that followed, I made some decisions. I sold one of the rental properties, a house on Medford Street that had needed a new roof for 2 years, and used part of the proceeds to set up a small scholarship fund through the community college in Dayton. George had gone there for his first 2 years before transferring to Ohio State, and he'd always said it was the place that made everything else possible. It felt right. I also hired a property management company for the remaining rentals, which is something I should have done long before. I'm 67 years old and I have no interest in being a landlord in any hands-on sense of the word. The income comes in, I review the statements. That's plenty. My daughter and Derek separated in June. She moved into an apartment not far from me, and we started having dinner together on Sundays, which became the thing I looked forward to most each week. She started seeing a therapist. She got a promotion at work. She looked, gradually, more like herself. I planted a garden in the backyard that summer. George had always meant to do it, but never quite got around to it, and I'd let the beds go to grass after he died. That spring, I put in tomatoes and basil and a row of sunflowers along the back fence. They grew taller than I expected, almost comically tall. Every morning, I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee and looked at them and thought about how strange life is and how much can be growing quietly in the dark before anyone sees it. There's a thing I've come to understand. Standing in that courtroom in my grey suit, watching a man realize too late that he had badly miscalculated. It's not about winning. It was never about winning. It was about the 39 years of a quiet man who drove a sensible car and wore the same khaki pants and got up every morning and thought about how to protect the person he loved, even after he was gone. That's not something you can file a motion against. That's not something that fits in a brochure. George knew who I was. That turned out to be enough. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the courtroom, not the judge's face, not even the number on that page Olivia slid across the conference table. It's George at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning in 1997, drinking his decaf, reading the paper, not saying much. Just being there. I thought I knew everything about that man. It turns out I knew the best parts and missed the most important one, that everything he did quietly, he did on purpose. I think about cause and effect a lot now, not in a dramatic way. Just the plain, unglamorous truth that what we do or don't do sets things in motion that we never fully see. Derek assumed that because I was older, because I was alone, because I hadn't corrected him when he talked over me at dinner, that I was someone he could maneuver around. Every assumption he made was the result of something that came before it. And everything that happened in that courtroom was the result of something that came before that too. George opening an account in 1997. George updating his instructions in 2021. Me sitting across from Olivia and deciding quietly to trust what my husband had built. What I've learned, and I mean really learned, not the kind of thing you say at a funeral, is that character is the only thing that compounds over time the way money does. George had more integrity in his khaki pants and sensible car than men with twice his income ever managed. He didn't protect me because he thought I was weak. He protected me because he understood that love isn't just a feeling, it's a plan. It's the thing you do at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday when no one is watching and there's nothing to gain from it yet. And then there's the matter of knowing your own mind. I spent 22 years as a financial examiner. I reviewed documents that would make most people's eyes cross. I had sat in rooms with men who tried to talk past me, and I had simply waited until they finished and then asked the question they didn't want to answer. None of that disappeared when I retired. None of it disappeared when George died or when I stopped being anyone's colleague or supervisor or professional contact. It was still there. It had always been there. The mistake, mine, if I'm being honest, was letting people forget it. Letting the silence read as absence instead of patience. My daughter is figuring herself out now. Some days that looks like progress, and some days it looks like a woman sitting across from her mother at a diner booth not quite knowing what to say. That's okay. I know what it is to not know what to say. I know what it is to be in a room where everyone has an opinion about your life, and to have to find, underneath all that noise, the thing you actually think. What I want for her, what I think George wanted for both of us, is the kind of steadiness that doesn't depend on anyone else's recognition. Not the judge knowing your name, not the room going quiet, just the knowledge, private and unshakable, that you have done the right thing for the right reasons, and that it will hold. The sunflowers I planted grew taller than the fence this year. I didn't expect that, but I suppose that's the thing about roots. You don't always know how deep they go until something tries to pull against them.